Imagine calling 911 in your final moments, begging for help, only to watch through your window as police arrive, knock on your door, and then leave. For 25-year-old Kiana Griffin, this nightmare became reality on March 13, 2019. Her terrified whispers to the emergency operator would be her last words, and the police response would become one of the most controversial decisions in Grand Rapids history. What happened next would destroy an entire family and launch a manhunt that continues to this day. If you're fascinated by true crime cases that expose the flaws in our system and the evil that can hide in plain sight, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Today's case will take you deep into a double murder that could have been prevented, a killer who vanished without a trace, and a family's tragic pursuit of justice that ended in even more heartbreak. This is the story of the Sheldon Avenue Murders, a case that begins with a desperate 911 call and ends with one of America's most wanted fugitives still walking free. It's a story about trust betrayed, opportunities missed, and how a family's worst day became the start of years of unanswered questions. Grand Rapids, Michigan sits 30 miles inland from Lake Michigan, a city of nearly 200,000 residents known for furniture manufacturing and vibrant arts districts. But beneath its Midwestern charm lies a darker reality, crime rates that rank among the highest in the state. On Sheldon Avenue Southeast, about a mile from downtown, stood a modest home that had been a sanctuary for 3 generations of women. That sanctuary was about to become a crime scene that would haunt investigators for years to come. The house belonged to 65-year-old Jacqueline Baber Bay, a hard-working matriarch who had spent her life providing stability for her family. Living with her was her 47-year-old daughter Sherletta and Sherletta's 25-year-old niece, Kiana Griffin. These women represented the best of family bonds, love, support, and the kind of trust that made them vulnerable to the predator, who would soon shatter their world forever. Sherletta Baber Bay was described by everyone who knew her as gentle, nurturing, and perhaps too trusting for her own good. At 47, she had never experienced a serious romantic relationship, a fact that made her family both protective and hopeful when she finally found someone who seemed to care for her. Her niece, Kiana Griffin, was the opposite in many ways, bubbly, outgoing, and beloved by everyone she met. She had just celebrated her 25th birthday, with her whole life stretching ahead of her like an open road. The dynamic in the Baber Bay household changed when Sherletta met a man at the downtown Grand Rapids Public Library. She had been there with her mother countless times, but on this particular day she was alone when she encountered someone who would change everything. The man introduced himself simply as Jay, quiet, unemployed, and somewhat eccentric, but he paid attention to Sherletta in ways no one ever had before. Jay moved into the family home, spending most of his time alone with Sherletta in their shared bedroom. The family found him odd but harmless. He had no job, no social media presence, no cell phone they knew of, and no local friends. He rarely spoke to other family members, and when he did, it was often about conspiracy theories that made them uncomfortable. But Sherletta was happy, and that was enough for her family to accept this strange new addition to their household. What the family didn't know was that Jay wasn't his real name. What they didn't know was that he had a history of violence against women that stretched back years. What they didn't know was that he had been using multiple aliases to hide a pattern of abuse that would soon explode into their lives with devastating consequences. Kiana Griffin had reservations about her aunt's boyfriend from the beginning. She found him creepy and odd, and she wasn't shy about expressing her concerns to family members. Her intuition about dangerous people was sharper than most, but in this case, being right would cost her everything. March 13, 2019, began like thousands of other mornings in the Baber Bay household. Jacqueline left for work at her usual time, around 8 a.m., kissing her daughter and granddaughter goodbye, as she had done countless times before. The house settled into its quiet rhythm, with Sherletta likely preparing for her day and Kiana going about her morning routine. Nothing suggested that this ordinary Wednesday would become the worst day in their family's history, but at exactly 10:29 a.m., everything changed.
911 emergency.
I need help.
Hello?
I need
Okay, where are you located? 553 Sheldon. Okay, can you tell me what's going on there?
The voice belonged to Kiana Griffin, and the terror in her whisper was unmistakable. She was calling for help in what would be the final moments of her young life, but the call was brief, lasting only precious seconds before the line went dead.
Just hurry up, please. I'm gonna die. You're trying to kill me. You already killed my name. You need to hurry up, please.
Okay, ma'am, I'll start the police that way. Can you tell me what your name is?
The 911 operator tried to keep Kiana on the line, but it was too late. Whatever was happening inside 553 Sheldon Avenue had already begun, and help was still minutes away. 7 minutes and 41 seconds after that desperate call ended, 3 Grand Rapids police officers arrived at the address. They approached methodically, one taking the front door, another checking the side entrance, and a third surveying the back of the property. They knocked loudly, called out, and waited for any response from inside. The house remained silent, its doors locked, its windows revealing nothing of the horror that lay within. What happened next would become the subject of intense scrutiny, family anguish, and questions about police protocols that persist to this day. With no visible signs of disturbance, no sounds from inside, and no response to their calls, the officers faced a decision that would haunt everyone involved. Standing outside 553 Sheldon Avenue, the 3 Grand Rapids police officers found themselves in a situation that would later become the most controversial aspect of this entire case. They had responded to a brief, unclear 911 call from a woman who sounded distressed, but now they faced a house that appeared completely normal from the outside. Doors locked, windows intact, no sounds of struggle or distress. One officer, reviewing the brief 911 call, made a suggestion that would later be dissected by investigators, prosecutors, and the victim's family. He wondered aloud if the caller might be experiencing a mental health crisis. Police Code 1096. The call had been so brief and unclear that it was difficult to determine the exact nature of the emergency. Without probable cause to force entry, no visible signs of violence, no sounds of distress, no clear evidence of immediate danger, the officers were bound by Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizure. Police cannot simply break down doors based on unclear phone calls. They need specific justification for such dramatic action. After 3 minutes and 42 seconds at the scene, the officers made their decision. They left. For the next 2 hours and 20 minutes, 553 Sheldon Avenue remained silent. If Kiana Griffin was still alive when police first knocked on that door, those hours represented her final moments on Earth. If her killer was still inside or nearby, those same hours represented precious time to complete his crime, clean up evidence, and begin an escape that continues to this day. The family would later express devastating anger about this decision. In their view, their loved one had called for help, and help had arrived only to turn away. They felt that if officers had broken down the door immediately, the outcome might have been different. The pain of knowing that salvation had been so close, yet ultimately too late, would compound their grief in ways that mere words cannot express. Kent County Prosecutor Chris Becker would later defend the officers' actions, explaining the legal constraints they faced. "You've got to have some pretty good reason to go in," he said. "There's got to be something that drives them more than just a phone call." The house had appeared secure, quiet, and undisturbed, not the typical scene of an active emergency. But legal justifications provide little comfort to families who have lost everything. At 1:02 p.m. on March 13, 2019, another 911 call shattered the afternoon quiet at the Grand Rapids Emergency Dispatch Center. This time, the caller's voice was male, panicked, and heartbreakingly clear about what he had found.
911 emergency.
From the 553 Sheldon, my sister not moving.
What's the address?
553 Sheldon, there's blood everywhere. My sister is not moving.
Okay, stand on line. You said shirt?
553
Sheldon.
Sheldon, Southeast. It's a yellow house, clean. Hurry up.
553 Sheldon,
Yes.
Southeast.
Yes. Pre-alert already for a female there, not breathing. Caller says she sees a lot of blood.
All right. Caller?
Oh, please.
Ma'am?
I usually stop over here before I go to work to my grandma's house and her friends. was over here outside and came in, and I didn't even come upstairs.
Ma'am, is she breathing?
I'm not a ma'am. No, I'm her brother.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm not a doctor. Please come home. Yeah, somebody stabbed her or something.
She's been stabbed.
The caller was Sanford Cummings, Kiana Griffin's brother, who had stopped by the house on his way to work to check on his family. What he found inside would traumatize him forever and finally bring police racing back to an address they had visited hours earlier. When officers returned to 553 Sheldon Avenue Southeast, they found a scene of calculated brutality that would haunt seasoned investigators. Kiana Griffin lay in an upstairs bedroom, victim of a vicious attack that had ended her young life. She had been shot 4 times, including once in the face, wounds that spoke to either extreme rage or cold, methodical execution. In another upstairs bedroom, they discovered Sherletta Bay in a scene that was somehow even more chilling in its callousness. She was lying on her bed under a blanket, an iPad still playing beside her, earbuds still in her ears. She had been shot once in the back of the head, execution style apparently while watching a video, completely unaware of the danger approaching from behind. The intimate, trusting nature of her final moments made the betrayal even more devastating. The killer had left evidence scattered throughout the crime scene like breadcrumbs leading toward his identity. Shell casings littered the bedroom floors. A roll of duct tape stained with blood was found beneath Sherletta's bed, a chilling indicator of what the victims may have endured before their deaths. The scenes painted a picture of violence that was both personal and brutal, suggesting the killer knew his victims intimately and had unrestricted access to their home. The most obvious suspect was nowhere to be found. Jay, Sherletta's quiet, odd boyfriend, had vanished completely. Hours after the bodies were discovered, Detective Captain Mark Bennett was canvassing the area behind the Sheldon Avenue house when he made a discovery that would prove crucial to the investigation. In an alley northwest of the crime scene, hastily discarded in what appeared to be a panic, lay a box of ammunition with 8 rounds missing. Beside it, a plastic bag contained a 9mm high-point pistol, the murder weapon. The ammunition matched the shell casings found at the crime scene perfectly, confirming this was indeed the gun used to end 2 innocent lives. But the pistol itself told an even more disturbing story that would reveal the killer's identity and his history of terrorizing women. When investigators ran the serial number through federal databases, they discovered the weapon had been reported stolen in July 2017 by a woman who had been terrorized by a harassing ex-boyfriend. The same gun that had been taken from one victim of domestic violence had now been used to murder 2 more women, a connection that would lead police directly to their suspect. As detectives processed the crime scene with meticulous care, they began to piece together the mystery of the missing man who had been living in the house. The family knew him only as Jay, but investigators soon discovered that this identity was as fake as everything else about him. Hidden in Sherletta's bedroom closet was a shoebox containing letters between her and an incarcerated man, intimate correspondence that revealed the depth of their relationship. Each letter was signed with the initial J, but in one of these letters, the writer revealed his true identity to the woman who loved him, Darrell Demon Brown. The single photograph police had of the suspect came from a 2013 arrest record. Using this image and his real name, they began to reconstruct the true identity and criminal history of the man the Bay family had welcomed into their home with open hearts. What they discovered would reveal a pattern of violence against women that stretched back years and crossed multiple states. Darrell Brown wasn't just a quiet, odd man with conspiracy theories. He was a predator with a documented history of domestic violence, multiple aliases, and a talent for manipulating vulnerable women who were looking for love and companionship. Darrell Demon Brown, 45 years old at the time of the murders, had spent decades perfecting the art of finding and terrorizing vulnerable women. His criminal history read like a blueprint for domestic abuse, with each incident escalating in severity and showing a complete disregard for human dignity and safety. In 2005, a former girlfriend and mother of one of his children, had reported to police that Brown had subjected her to a terrifying assault that demonstrated the depths of his capacity for violence. According to the police report, he had become enraged with her during an argument, tied her up with electrical cords, gagged her to muffle her screams, kicked her repeatedly in the face, and then doused her with lighter fluid in what appeared to be preparation for setting her on fire. The woman had managed to escape and seek help, but the psychological manipulation that defines abusive relationships was already at work. Despite the severity of the attack and the clear danger Brown represented, she later decided to drop the charges. She told police she still loved him and believed he needed help rather than punishment. She didn't think prison would provide the assistance he needed to change his behavior. This decision would prove tragically prophetic. Instead of receiving mental health treatment or facing serious consequences for his actions, Brown was allowed to plead guilty to only a misdemeanor charge. The lack of serious punishment sent a clear message that his violence against women would be tolerated by the system, emboldening him to continue his pattern of abuse with future victims. Another woman who had dated Brown in 2017 provided police with the crucial link that would connect him directly to the murder weapon. She had reported her high-point pistol stolen around the same time Brown was harassing her, creating a direct line from his history of domestic violence to the gun that would later kill Sherletta and Kiana. Reverend Robert Dean of the New Life Church of God in Christ had encountered another side of Brown's personality years before the murders. Finding Brown rummaging through the church dumpster, the compassionate pastor learned he was homeless and allowed him to stay at the church for several months. But Brown's true nature eventually emerged when one of his girlfriends visited the pastor to express her fears about Brown's increasingly controlling behavior. On the afternoon of March 13, 2019, while police were still processing the crime scene at 5553 Sheldon Avenue, Darrell Brown was moving through downtown Grand Rapids with the calm purposefulness of someone following a carefully planned escape route. Surveillance cameras throughout the city captured his movements, creating a timeline that would later help investigators understand how he had managed to disappear so completely. The most chilling piece of footage showed Brown entering the Grand Rapids Children's Museum at exactly 3:24 p.m. on the day of the murders, just hours after ending 2 lives. He stayed for precisely 12 minutes, reportedly telling staff at the front desk that he knew someone inside the building. When museum employees informed him that he couldn't wander the facility unaccompanied, he left without argument at 3:36 p.m. The image of a cold-blooded killer calmly walking through a children's museum, surrounded by innocent families enjoying their day, while 2 women lay dead in a house across town, represents one of the most disturbing aspects of this entire case. It demonstrates the calculating nature of Brown's personality and his ability to blend into normal society, even in the immediate aftermath of committing horrific violence. Other surveillance cameras captured Brown walking through various parts of downtown Grand Rapids throughout that afternoon. A former girlfriend reportedly dropped him off in the downtown area, but after that the trail went cold. It was as if Darrell Brown had simply vanished into thin air. Initially, prosecutors charged Brown only with receiving and concealing a stolen firearm, a charge that would allow authorities to arrest him anywhere in the country and extradite him back to Michigan. This approach was strategic, giving law enforcement the legal authority to apprehend Brown while they continued building their murder case. But as evidence mounted and witnesses were interviewed, prosecutors upgraded the charges to 2 counts of first-degree murder. By then, however, Brown had disappeared completely. Despite intensive efforts by local police, state authorities, and eventually federal agencies, no trace of him could be found. The search expanded nationwide, with reported sightings in multiple states proving fruitless. Each false lead brought brief hope to the victim's family, only to end in disappointment and renewed frustration. A $2,500 reward was initially offered for information leading to Brown's location, but as months passed without results, it became clear that finding him would require more resources and national attention. The Bay and Griffin families struggled to comprehend not only the loss of their beloved Sherletta and Kiana, but also the knowledge that their killer remained free. In interviews with local media, They sat in the front room of the family home, surrounded by candles lit in vigil for their lost loved ones, trying to make sense of a tragedy that defied understanding. Anya Griffin, Kiana's mother and Sherletta's sister, spoke about the man they had all known as Jay with a mixture of bewilderment and betrayal. Some people say he was a little strange, she was a little different, you know. But they said that about my sister too. She was quiet, you know. She wasn't a social person. So just because you're quiet and you're a little different than everyone else doesn't mean that you're a murderer. My sister, she loved him. She had never had a boyfriend before. But this man blindsided all of us. The family's anger toward the police response to Kiana's initial 911 call remained raw and unhealed. They felt that their loved one had called for help in her final moments, and that help had arrived only to turn away based on departmental protocols that prioritized procedure over human life. They didn't care, family members said. They was here a minimum of 3 minutes and they went on about their happy way. And then at 1 o'clock or so, you get another call because you didn't care at 10 o'clock. Someone is trying to kill me and you won't knock down the door. You don't know she could have been tied up in this house. The legal system's explanation for the officer's actions provided no comfort to people who had lost everything. While prosecutors could cite Fourth Amendment protections and the need for probable cause, the family saw only missed opportunities and failed responsibility. The 3 hours and 20 minutes between Kiana's call and the discovery of the bodies felt like an eternity of lost chances. As months passed without an arrest, the family established a routine of holding regular vigils for Sherletta and Kiana. They would light candles in their memory, share stories about their lives, and keep their spirits alive through ritual and remembrance. These gatherings provided some measure of comfort and community support during the darkest period of their lives. But those memorial candles would inadvertently cause another tragedy that would devastate what remained of the family. On July 16, 2020, the candles left burning after a vigil the night before ignited a fire that consumed the house on Sheldon Avenue. Jacqueline Baber Bay and her 5-year-old great-grandson, E.J. Cummings, were trapped on the second floor and died in the flames. In July 2021, more than 2 years after the murders, the U.S. Marshals Service made a decision that brought national attention to the case. They added Darrell Demon Brown to their list of 15 most wanted fugitives, elevating him to the same level as terrorists, major drug dealers, and other dangerous criminals who pose significant threats to public safety. The federal designation came with significant resources and a substantial increase in the reward money. The bounty for information leading to Brown's capture jumped from $2,500 to $25,000, reflecting both the seriousness of his crimes and the frustration of law enforcement agencies that had been unable to locate him despite years of intensive searching. U.S. Marshal supervisors believe that Brown fled Michigan immediately after the murders and may be receiving assistance from family members or associates who are helping him evade capture. His ability to remain hidden for so long suggests either careful advance planning or ongoing support from people willing to harbor a wanted killer. Brown's background provided investigators with several potential locations where he might seek refuge. While he grew up in Grand Rapids and graduated from high school there, he also has relatives scattered across multiple states, including Wisconsin, Arizona, Ohio, and Georgia. Each of these locations represents a potential safe haven where he might blend into local communities while avoiding detection. The challenge of apprehending fugitives in modern America is complicated by several factors that work in Brown's favor. Unlike many criminals, he had no significant social media presence, no regular employment history that could be tracked, and no close local friendships that might provide leads to investigators. His pattern of using multiple aliases, Darrell Robinson, Carter Brown, Derek Brown, Michael Richardson, Marcus Wright, demonstrates a long-standing practice of identity manipulation that makes him particularly difficult to trace. Law enforcement agencies have received numerous tips and reported sightings over the years, but each lead has ultimately proven false. In early 2024, there were reports that Brown might have been spotted in Dayton, Ohio, generating renewed hope for his capture, but these sightings could not be confirmed. The U.S. Marshals continue to believe that Brown, now 50 years old, is alive and hiding somewhere in the United States. Their profile describes him as an African-American male, 5 feet 8 inches tall, weighing approximately 180 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes. They emphasize that he should be considered armed and extremely dangerous, and civilians should not attempt to approach or apprehend him under any circumstances. The Sheldon Avenue murders expose uncomfortable truths about domestic violence, police response protocols, and the limitations of our justice system when confronting determined criminals. More than 5 years after Sherletta and Kiana Griffin were killed, their case continues to raise questions that extend far beyond the search for their killer. The controversy surrounding the initial police response highlights the impossible balance between individual rights and public safety that law enforcement officers must navigate every day. While the family's anger about the officer's decision to leave without forcing entry is completely understandable, the legal constraints that guided their actions reflect constitutional protections that serve important purposes in a free society. The Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable search and seizure exists to prevent government agents from invading private homes without justification. In most cases, this protection serves citizens well, preventing abuse of power and maintaining the principle that a person's home is their castle. But in tragic cases like this one, those same protections can become barriers to saving innocent lives. The case also illustrates the complex challenges of identifying and stopping domestic violence before it escalates to murder. Darrell Brown's history showed a clear pattern of increasingly dangerous behavior toward the women in his life, but the criminal justice system's response had been inadequate. His 2005 assault on a former girlfriend should have resulted in serious consequences that might have prevented future violence. But plea bargaining and the victim's reluctance to pursue charges allowed him to escape with minimal punishment. This pattern repeats itself in domestic violence cases across the country, where victims' emotional attachments to their abusers, combined with systemic failures to take such crimes seriously, create conditions that enable escalating violence. Sherletta became another victim of a man whose previous crimes had been minimized by a system that too often treats violence against women as a lesser priority. The investigation itself demonstrates both the capabilities and limitations of modern law enforcement. Investigators were able to quickly identify Brown as their primary suspect, trace the murder weapon to his previous victim, and piece together a comprehensive timeline of his movements on the day of the murders. Surveillance cameras provided crucial evidence, and forensic analysis confirmed the connections between the suspect and the crime. Yet despite all these investigative successes, Brown remains free more than 5 years later, demonstrating that even the most thorough police work cannot guarantee that justice will be served. As we approach the 6th anniversary of the Sheldon Avenue murders, Darrell Demon Brown remains one of America's most wanted fugitives. His ability to evade capture for so long has made his case a source of frustration for law enforcement agencies and a symbol of the challenges facing the American justice system in the 21st century. The $25,000 reward offered by the U.S. Marshals Service remains in effect, representing one of the largest bounties available for information leading to the capture of a wanted fugitive. This substantial sum reflects both the seriousness of Brown's crimes and the desperation of authorities who have exhausted traditional investigative methods without success. Modern fugitive investigations rely heavily on digital footprints, social media activity, cell phone usage, credit card transactions, and online communications that can reveal a person's location and activities. Brown's case is particularly challenging because he appears to have lived largely off the grid even before becoming a fugitive. His lack of social media presence, regular employment, or strong local connections means that many of the tools law enforcement typically uses to track suspects are simply not available in his case. The involvement of federal agencies has brought additional resources to the search, including access to national databases, interstate coordination, and specialized fugitive task forces. The U.S. Marshals Service has a strong track record of apprehending wanted criminals, including fugitives who have been on the run for years or even decades. Their addition of Brown to the 15 most wanted list demonstrates their commitment to his capture and their belief that he will eventually be found. For the surviving members of the Baber Bay and Griffin families, the ongoing search represents both hope and frustration. Each reported sighting brings the possibility that justice might finally be served, but each false lead extends their wait for closure. The absence of accountability adds another layer to grief that has already been compounded by multiple tragedies. The case has also become a teaching tool for law enforcement agencies, examining their own response protocols and domestic violence prevention strategies. While the officers who responded to Kiana's initial 911 call followed department procedures and legal requirements, the tragic outcome has prompted discussions about when and how those procedures might be modified to better protect potential victims. Some departments have implemented enhanced training for domestic violence calls, improved communication between dispatchers and responding officers, and revised protocols for situations involving unclear or brief emergency calls. These changes won't bring back Sherletta and Kiana, but they might help prevent similar tragedies in the future. The story of the Sheldon Avenue murders is ultimately about more than crime and punishment. It's about the ripple effects of violence that extend far beyond the immediate victims. Sherletta Baber Bay and Kiana Griffin were not just statistics in a crime report. They were beloved family members whose deaths created a void that can never be filled. Sherletta, at 47, had finally found what she thought was love after years of loneliness. Her gentle, trusting nature made her vulnerable to a predator who saw her kindness as weakness to be exploited. She died believing she was loved by the man who killed her, betrayed in the most intimate and devastating way possible. Kiana, at 25, had her entire life ahead of her. She was described as bubbly and big-hearted, the kind of person who brought joy to everyone around her. Her intuitive distrust of her aunt's boyfriend proved tragically accurate, but her attempt to seek help in her final moments went unanswered until it was too late. The subsequent deaths of Jacqueline Baber Bay and 5-year-old E.J. Cummings in the house fire that consumed their home added another layer of tragedy to a family that had already suffered unimaginable loss. 4 lives ended because one man chose violence over humanity, control over love, and selfishness over compassion. Darrell Demon Brown's continued freedom represents more than just a failure of the justice system. It's a reminder that evil can triumph when good people fail to act decisively. His ability to vanish completely demonstrates the limitations of law enforcement in a vast country where someone determined to disappear can often succeed, at least temporarily. But the search continues, and with it, the hope that justice, however delayed, will eventually be served. Every day that Brown remains free is another day he poses a potential threat to other innocent people who might cross his path. His history of violence against women, combined with his apparent ability to manipulate and exploit vulnerable people, makes his capture a matter of public safety as well as justice for his victims. If you have any information about the whereabouts of Darrell Demon Brown, no matter how insignificant it might seem, please contact your local law enforcement agency or the U.S. Marshals Service immediately. He may be using any of his known aliases: Darrell Robinson, Carter Brown, Derek Brown, Michael Richardson, or Marcus Wright. He should be considered armed and extremely dangerous. Do not attempt to approach or apprehend him yourself. The $25,000 reward remains available for information that leads directly to Brown's arrest and prosecution. Your tip could be the key that finally brings justice for Sherletta, Kiana, and their family members who continue to wait for answers. Remember their names, remember their stories, and help ensure that the man who destroyed so many lives is finally held accountable for his crimes. Justice delayed is not justice denied, not as long as people continue to care, continue to search, and continue to believe that evil will ultimately face consequences. The search for Darrell Brown continues, and with your help, it will reach its rightful conclusion.